Lightning cracked across the New Mexico sky as Josephine Norton clutched the reins of her wagon, her knuckles white with fear and determination. The year was 1878, and what had started as a routine journey from Santa Fe to Cimarron had transformed into a fight for survival as the spring storm unleashed its fury upon the unforgiving landscape. Rain pelted her face like tiny needles as she squinted through the darkness, trying to discern the path ahead. The wagon lurched violently as a wheel caught in a rut, nearly sending her flying from her seat. Behind her, the precious cargo of books, clothing, and household supplies she'd spent months saving for shifted precariously. "Steady now," she murmured to her team of horses, their ears flattened against their heads in terror. "Just a little further." Josephine had never imagined this would be how her new beginning would start. At 23, she had accepted the position as Cimarron's new schoolteacher, eager to leave behind the painful memories of her parents' deaths and the suffocating pity of Santa Fe society. Independence called to her like a siren song, promising purpose and perhaps even happiness. Another blinding flash illuminated the trail ahead, followed almost instantly by a deafening crack of thunder. The horses reared in panic, and Josephine fought desperately to control them. A gust of wind whipped her drenched skirts around her legs as she pulled on the reins. "Whoa, whoa there," she shouted above the storm's roar. The wagon veered sharply to the right before coming to a sudden, jolting halt. Josephine was thrown forward, her head striking the wooden frame with enough force to momentarily daze her. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth as she bit her lip. Disoriented, she touched her forehead, and her fingers came away red. It took her several moments to register the acrid smell permeating the air. Smoke. Her heart lurched as she turned to see orange flames licking at the canvas cover of her wagon, feeding voraciously on the dry material despite the rain. Lightning had struck, and her entire world was about to go up in flames. Panic seized her as she tried to climb down, but her sodden skirts tangled around her legs. The horses whinnied in terror, straining against their harnesses. The heat intensified behind her as the fire spread with terrifying speed. "Help!" she screamed, though she knew it was futile. Who would hear her out here, miles from civilization, in the midst of a raging storm? As if in answer to her desperate prayer, a shadowy figure on horseback materialized through the curtain of rain. The rider approached at a gallop, and as another flash of lightning illuminated the scene, Josephine caught a glimpse of a man's determined face beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "Jump," he commanded, bringing his horse alongside the wagon seat. "Now, miss." Josephine hesitated only a fraction of a second before she launched herself toward him, trusting this stranger with her life. Strong arms caught her, pulling her securely against a solid chest as the wagon erupted fully into flames behind them, the fire roaring defiantly against the rain. "The horses!" she cried. Without a word, the man spurred his mount forward. Still holding Josephine with one arm, he leaned down to slash at the harnesses of the panicked team with a knife produced from his belt. The freed animals bolted away from the burning wagon. "They'll be safer than us if we don't find shelter," the man shouted over the storm. His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas origins. He guided his horse away from the blazing wagon, and Josephine caught one last glimpse of her possessions, her books, her mother's china, the beautiful quilt her grandmother had made, all consumed by merciless flames. She swallowed a sob as the stranger's horse carried them into the darkness. The rain continued its assault as they rode, Josephine shivering uncontrollably against the man's chest. She couldn't see his face clearly, but she felt the steady beat of his heart, a comforting rhythm amid the chaos. "There's an old line shack about half a mile ahead," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "Hang on tight." Josephine nodded, too cold and frightened to speak. She clung to him as the horse navigated the treacherous terrain with remarkable surety. True to his word, a small, dilapidated structure soon emerged from the gloom. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, then reached up to help Josephine down. Her legs buckled as her feet touched the ground, and he caught her before she could fall. "Easy there," he said, supporting her weight. "Let's get you inside." The interior of the line shack was Spartan but dry. The man quickly secured the door against the howling wind, then struck a match to light a small lantern hanging from a ceiling beam. In the warm glow, Josephine finally saw her rescuer clearly. He stood tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a lean frame. Dark hair curled damply around a face bronzed by the sun and weathered by the elements. His eyes, a startling shade of blue, assessed her with concern. "You're bleeding," he said, reaching out to gently touch her forehead. Josephine winced. "It's nothing," he snorted softly. "That's quite a gash. Sit down before you fall down." Too exhausted to argue, Josephine sank onto a crude wooden bench while the man rummaged through his saddlebags. He produced a flask and a clean bandana, which he dampened with a small amount of liquid from the flask. "This might sting," he warned before carefully cleaning the blood from her face. The whiskey burned, but Josephine bit her lip and remained still. "Thank you," she said when he finished. "You saved my life, Mr. Stone," he replied. "Dawson Stone." "Josephine Norton," she offered in return. "I was on my way to Cimarron to take up a position as the schoolteacher there." Dawson's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're a long way from the main trail, Miss Norton." "The bridge at Carson's Creek was washed out. I was attempting to find another crossing point when the storm hit." He nodded, moving to tend to his horse. "Lucky I was passing through." "What brings you out in such weather, Mr. Stone?" she asked. A shadow passed over his features. "Just finishing some business." Something in his tone discouraged further questions. Josephine shivered again, her wet clothes clinging uncomfortably to her skin. Noticing her discomfort, Dawson pulled a wool blanket from his saddlebags and handed it to her. "You should get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death." Josephine flushed. "I'm afraid that's not possible under the circumstances, Mr. Stone." The corner of his mouth quirked up. "I'll step outside while you change. The blanket's big enough to preserve your modesty." Before she could protest, he added, "I've got some jerky and hardtack in my bags. Not much of a meal, but it'll keep your strength up." He placed the food on the bench beside her, then moved toward the door. "I'll check on your horses. Call if you need anything." Once alone, Josephine quickly stripped off her sodden dress and petticoats, wrapping the rough but wonderfully dry blanket around herself. She hung her wet garments on a nail protruding from the wall, hoping they might dry by morning. When Dawson returned, he was carrying an armful of relatively dry wood. "Found some under the overhang," he explained, setting about building a small fire in the crude stone hearth. Soon, a modest blaze cast dancing shadows across the shack's walls. Josephine moved closer, grateful for the warmth. She studied Dawson surreptitiously as he tended the fire. Despite his rough exterior, there was something gentle in the way he moved, something thoughtful in his eyes that intrigued her. "Your horses are fine," he said, breaking the silence. "They found shelter under some trees not far from here." "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." He nodded once, then sat on the floor, his back against the wall. "Where are you from originally, Miss Norton?" "Santa Fe," she replied. "Though I was born in Boston, my father moved us west when I was 12, seeking his fortune in silver mining." "And did he find it?" A sad smile touched her lips. "No, he found pneumonia instead last winter. My mother followed him to the grave a month later." Dawson's eyes softened. "I'm sorry." "What about you, Mr. Stone? Where do you call home?" He stared into the flames for a long moment. "Nowhere particular these days. I was born in Texas, but I've been drifting since the war." "The war." Josephine studied him with new understanding. He would have been just a boy when it started, perhaps 16 or 17 by the end. Many men never truly came home, even if they physically returned. "Are you heading to Cimarron as well?" she asked. "I might be now," he replied with a slight smile. "Can't very well leave you stranded, can I?" Relief washed over her. The thought of continuing her journey alone, with no supplies and no transportation, had been weighing heavily on her mind. "I've lost everything," she whispered, the reality of her situation hitting her anew. "All my belongings, my teaching materials." "You're alive," Dawson pointed out quietly. "That counts for something." Josephine nodded, blinking back tears. "Yes, thanks to you." They lapsed into comfortable silence, the crackle of the fire and the rhythm of the rain on the roof the only sounds. Despite the dire circumstances, Josephine felt strangely at peace in the presence of this quiet, enigmatic man. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her and she drifted into a fitful sleep, still seated by the fire. She woke briefly to find herself being gently laid down on a makeshift pallet of saddle blankets, Dawson's coat tucked around her for additional warmth. "Sleep," he murmured. "You're safe now." And somehow, despite everything, she believed him. Morning brought watery sunshine and a world washed clean by the storm. Josephine's clothes were still damp, but wearable. She dressed quickly while Dawson waited outside, then stepped into the crisp air to find him saddling his horse. "Your team came back," he said, nodding toward her two horses grazing nearby. "Seems they're not ready to abandon you just yet." "That's fortunate," she replied, relieved to see the animals unharmed, "but I'm afraid my wagon is beyond salvage." "We'll ride to Cimarron," Dawson said matter-of-factly. "It's about 15 miles. We should make it by afternoon if we start now." "Mr. Stone, I cannot possibly impose upon you further. It's not an imposition," he interrupted. "Besides, you'll need someone to vouch for your story when you arrive in town with nothing but the clothes on your back." He had a point. Arriving alone, bedraggled, with no possessions would hardly make a good first impression on her new employers. "Very well," she conceded. "But I insist on compensating you for your trouble once I receive my first wages." Dawson's mouth curved in amusement. "We'll discuss that later. Can you ride astride?" Josephine hesitated. "It's been many years, but yes, good." He fashioned a makeshift bridle for one of her horses using rope from his supplies. "You'll ride your bay, I'll take mine and lead your other horse." Soon they were underway. Josephine perched somewhat uncomfortably on her horse's bare back, her skirts hiked scandalously high to accommodate the position. Dawson tactfully kept his eyes averted from her exposed ankles and calves. As they rode, the landscape gradually transformed from rugged wilderness to the rolling grasslands that surrounded Cimarron. Josephine was struck by the beauty of the terrain, so different from the more arid regions around Santa Fe. "It's beautiful country," she remarked. Dawson nodded. "Rich grazing land, that's why the big cattle outfits are moving in." "Are you a cattleman, Mr. Stone?" A shadow crossed his face. "I was, once." There was a story there, Josephine sensed, but she didn't press. They continued in companionable silence for several miles, stopping occasionally to rest the horses and drink from Dawson's canteen. During one such break, as Josephine stretched her aching muscles, Dawson said, "Tell me about this teaching position." "The town council wrote that they've built a new schoolhouse," she replied, pleased by his interest. "There are about 20 children of school age in Cimarron and the surrounding area. It's a 1-year contract initially, but renewable if both parties are satisfied." "And you'll live where?" "There's a small cottage behind the schoolhouse. Part of my compensation includes housing." Dawson's expression was thoughtful. "Cimarron's growing fast. Rough elements come with that growth." "Are you suggesting it's not safe?" Josephine asked, suddenly concerned. "I'm suggesting you should be careful," he clarified. "It's not Santa Fe." "I'm not as fragile as I might appear, Mr. Stone," she said with a lift of her chin. "I've faced my share of challenges." His eyes met hers, and for a moment, Josephine felt as though he could see straight through to her soul. "I don't doubt your courage, Miss Norton, not after watching you handle yourself last night." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. They remounted and continued their journey. By mid-afternoon, the first buildings of Cimarron came into view, a scattered collection of wooden structures that comprised the growing frontier town. "Welcome to your new home," Dawson said as they approached the main street. Despite her exhaustion and the loss of her possessions, Josephine felt a flutter of excitement. This was to be her fresh start, her chance to build something of her own. The town was bustling with activity. Cowboys mingled with merchants, ranch hands with townspeople. Several saloons were doing brisk business despite the early hour, and the sound of a piano drifted from one establishment. Wagons and horses lined the muddy street, and a stagecoach was just departing from in front of a building marked Cimarron Hotel. Curious glances were cast their way as they rode toward the center of town. Josephine was acutely aware of her disheveled appearance and the absence of a proper saddle beneath her. "The town hall is there," Dawson indicated a 2-story building with a small bell tower. "That's where you'll find Mayor Wilson. He heads the town council." "You know Cimarron well," Josephine observed. "I've passed through a few times," he replied noncommittally. They dismounted in front of the town hall and Dawson secured the horses to a hitching post. As he helped Josephine down, his hands lingering briefly at her waist, she became suddenly, intensely aware of him, the clean scent of his skin beneath the dust of the trail, the strength in his calloused hands, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he looked at her. "Thank you," she said softly, stepping back to regain her composure. The town hall's interior was cool and relatively quiet after the bustle of the street. A clerk directed them to Mayor Wilson's office, where they were admitted after a brief wait. Mayor Wilson was a portly man with thinning hair and an impressive mustache. He rose from behind his desk as they entered, his eyebrows rising at Josephine's bedraggled appearance. "Mayor Wilson," Dawson said, removing his hat. "This is Miss Josephine Norton, your new schoolteacher, Miss Norton." "We weren't expecting you until tomorrow," the mayor exclaimed, coming around to shake her hand. "And in such a state, whatever has happened," Josephine explained about the washed-out bridge, the storm, and the loss of her wagon and possessions. "If not for Mr. Stone's timely intervention, I fear I would not be standing before you now," she concluded. The mayor's eyes widened as he turned to Dawson. "Stone, Dawson Stone. Well, I'll be damned, excuse me, Miss Norton, but we'd heard you were dead." Josephine looked at Dawson in surprise. He shifted uncomfortably. "As you can see, those reports were exaggerated. Indeed, this calls for a drink, I mean some refreshment." The mayor hastily corrected himself with a glance at Josephine. "Miss Norton, please sit down, you must be exhausted." As Josephine sank gratefully into a chair, Mayor Wilson poured 3 glasses of water from a pitcher on his desk. "Now, Miss Norton, please don't concern yourself about your lost belongings. We're just thankful you arrived safely. The schoolhouse and cottage are ready for your occupancy, and I'm sure the ladies of the town will help provide whatever you need until you can replace your possessions." "That's very kind," Josephine said, relieved by the warm reception. "Not at all. We're delighted to have an educated lady from back east teaching our children." The mayor turned to Dawson. "And you, Stone, what brings you back to these parts? Last I heard, you'd headed to Colorado after selling your spread to the Blackwell outfit." A muscle twitched in Dawson's jaw. "Just passing through, Mayor. Well, you've done us a great service by delivering our schoolteacher safely." Mayor Wilson beamed at them both. "Miss Norton, let me show you to your new home. Stone, will you join us?" Dawson hesitated, then nodded. "I'll see Miss Norton settled." The mayor led them outside and down the main street, pointing out various establishments as they walked: the general store, the church, the doctor's office. Josephine tried to absorb it all, but fatigue was making it difficult to focus. Finally, they reached the schoolhouse, a neat, whitewashed building at the edge of town. Behind it stood a small cottage, simple but sturdy, with a tiny porch and a garden plot. "It's lovely," Josephine said sincerely, taking in her new home. "It's modest, but we think you'll be comfortable," Mayor Wilson replied, producing a key. "Mrs. Peterson from the Ladies' Aid Society stocked the pantry and will be by tomorrow to help you get settled. The school term starts next Monday, which gives you a few days to prepare." He handed her the key, then turned to Dawson. "Stone, will you be staying in town?" Dawson glanced at Josephine, something unreadable in his eyes. "For a few days, perhaps." "Excellent. The Cimarron Hotel has decent rooms, or there's Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house if you prefer something quieter." The mayor checked his pocket watch. "If you'll excuse me, I have a meeting at the bank. Miss Norton, welcome to Cimarron." After the mayor departed, Josephine and Dawson stood in awkward silence for a moment. Finally, she said, "Would you like to come in?" "I could make coffee if there's any in the pantry." Dawson shook his head. "I should get your horses settled at the livery, then find a room for myself." "Oh, of course." Josephine tried to hide her disappointment. "Mr. Stone, I don't know how to thank you properly." "You don't need to," he interrupted gently. "I'm glad I was there." He tipped his hat and turned to leave, but Josephine called after him, "Will I see you again before you leave Cimarron?" Dawson paused, then looked back at her with a slight smile. "I imagine our paths will cross, Miss Norton. It's a small town." Josephine watched him walk away, leading her horses until he disappeared around a corner. Only then did she unlock her cottage door and step inside to begin her new life. The interior of the cottage was as neat and simple as its exterior suggested. A combined kitchen and sitting area occupied the front portion, with a small bedroom and an even smaller washroom at the back. Basic furniture: a table with 4 chairs, a settee, a rocking chair, a bed, and a dresser filled the spaces. The pantry was indeed stocked with essentials, and a fire had been laid in the hearth, needing only a match. Despite her exhaustion, Josephine felt a surge of pride as she surveyed her domain. This was her first true home as an independent woman. The loss of her possessions seemed less devastating now that she had this fresh beginning. She washed as best she could with the limited facilities, then changed into the nightgown she found folded at the foot of the bed, clearly part of Mrs. Peterson's thoughtful preparations. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, and Josephine fell into a deep, dreamless sleep almost instantly. She awoke to bright sunshine and a gentle knocking at her door. Hastily donning her rumpled dress, the only clothing she possessed, she went to answer it. A plump, pleasant-faced woman in her 50s stood on the porch, a large basket over one arm. "Miss Norton." "I'm Martha Peterson from the Ladies' Aid Society. Mayor Wilson told us about your misfortune, and we've come to help." Behind Mrs. Peterson stood 3 other women of varying ages, each carrying baskets or parcels. "Please come in," Josephine said, feeling self-conscious about her appearance but touched by their kindness. The women swept in like a benevolent whirlwind, exclaiming over the cottage, setting down their burdens and introducing themselves in rapid succession. Besides Mrs. Peterson, there was Mrs. Eleanor Jenkins, the minister's wife, Miss Abigail Turner, a spinster who ran the millinery shop, and Mrs. Sarah Rodriguez, whose husband owned the largest general store in town. "We've brought some essentials to tide you over, Mrs. Peterson explained, unpacking her basket to reveal clothing, toiletries, and foodstuffs. "These dresses may need some alteration, but they'll do until you can order your own." "This is incredibly generous," Josephine said, fighting back tears of gratitude. "Nonsense, dear. We take care of our own in Cimarron," Mrs. Jenkins declared. "Now let's get you properly settled." The next few hours passed in a flurry of activity. The women helped Josephine organize her new home, showed her how to operate the temperamental stove, and filled her in on town gossip while they worked. By mid-afternoon, the cottage was transformed into a comfortable haven, with borrowed curtains at the windows, fresh linens on the bed, and a nourishing stew simmering on the stove. "Now, Mrs. Peterson said as they prepared to leave, "I've arranged for my son to take you to the schoolhouse tomorrow morning so you can familiarize yourself with it before classes begin." "Thank you," Josephine said sincerely. "I don't know what I would have done without your help." "One more thing, Mrs. Rodriguez added. "We're having a small welcome gathering at the church tomorrow evening. Nothing fancy, just a chance for you to meet some of the parents and children." After the ladies departed, Josephine explored the schoolhouse, finding it well equipped with desks, a blackboard, and even a small library of books. She was examining these when she heard the door open behind her. Dawson Stone stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking somewhat ill at ease. "Miss Norton." "Mr. Stone," she replied, unreasonably pleased to see him. "Please come in." He stepped inside, glancing around the schoolroom with interest. "Nicer than any school I ever attended." "Did you have much formal education?" she asked. "Enough to get by." "My pa believed more in practical learning than book learning." He moved closer, setting a small parcel on her desk. "I brought you something." Curious, Josephine unwrapped the brown paper to reveal a beautiful leather-bound journal and a fountain pen. "I thought you might need something to keep your teaching records," Dawson explained, looking slightly embarrassed. "The shopkeeper said it was what schoolteachers use." Josephine ran her fingers over the smooth leather, deeply touched by his thoughtfulness. "It's perfect, thank you." "It's nothing." He cleared his throat. "How are you settling in?" "Very well, thanks to the ladies of the town. They've been incredibly kind." She hesitated, then asked, "And you, have you found accommodation at the hotel? It's comfortable enough." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken questions and a strange tension that hadn't been present during their journey to Cimarron. "Mayor Wilson seemed surprised to see you," Josephine ventured. "He mentioned something about thinking you were dead." Dawson's expression shuddered. "There was some trouble last year, a disagreement with a neighboring rancher that got out of hand. I left town rather suddenly. And now you've returned," briefly. His eyes met hers. "I have unfinished business to attend to." Josephine wanted to ask more but sensed his reluctance to elaborate. Instead, she said, "There's a welcome gathering for me at the church tomorrow evening. Would you consider attending? I'd feel more comfortable with a familiar face present." Surprise flickered across his features, followed by something warmer. I'm not much for social gatherings, but yes, I'll be there. Thank you, she smiled, inexplicably relieved. For everything, Dawson nodded once, then turned to leave. At the door, he paused. Miss Norton? Yes. I'm glad you made it to Cimarron safely. With that, he was gone, leaving Josephine staring after him, the journal clutched to her chest like a treasure. The welcome gathering at the church was a modest but warm affair. It seemed that half the town had turned out to meet their new schoolteacher. From dignified ranchers to rough-hewn cowboys, from merchants' wives to miners' families. Josephine shook countless hands and tried to memorize a dizzying array of names, all while searching the crowd for one particular face. Dawson arrived late, standing at the back of the room like a shadow. When their eyes met across the crowded space, something unspoken passed between them, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. Later, as the gathering was breaking up, he appeared at her side. You made quite an impression, he observed, especially on the children. They seem like wonderful students, she replied, having spent considerable time chatting with her future pupils. Eager to learn, most children are, given the chance. There was something wistful in his tone that made her wonder about his own childhood. They walked together to her cottage in the soft evening light, their pace unhurried. Josephine was wearing one of Mrs. Peterson's donated dresses, altered to fit her slimmer frame. Though simple, it was clean and presentable, a vast improvement over her storm-battered attire. You look nice, Dawson said suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. A blush warmed her cheeks. Thank you, it's borrowed, but it serves the purpose. The town seems taken with you, he continued. That's good, you'll need allies here. You make it sound as though I'm entering enemy territory, she said lightly. Dawson's expression remained serious. Frontier towns can be unforgiving places, especially for a woman alone. I'm not afraid, Josephine insisted, though his concern touched her. No, I don't suppose you are. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Stubborn, too. I prefer determined, she countered with a smile of her own. They had reached her cottage. Josephine turned to face him, suddenly reluctant for the evening to end. Would you like to come in for coffee? Dawson hesitated, conflict evident in his eyes. Better not, he said finally. People talk in small towns. Let them, she replied impulsively, then flushed at her own boldness. His eyes darkened, and for a breathtaking moment, Josephine thought he might step closer. Instead, he took a deliberate step back. Good night, Miss Norton. Good night, Mr. Stone, she murmured, watching him walk away into the gathering darkness. School began the following Monday, and Josephine threw herself into her new role with enthusiasm. The children of Cimarron proved to be a diverse group, ranging from the impeccably dressed offspring of merchants and ranchers to the rough and tumble children of miners and farmhands. Some were well educated already, others could barely write their names. All were curious about their new teacher from Santa Fe. Miss Norton, is it true a cowboy saved you from a burning wagon during the storm? Asked 10-year-old Emma Jenkins, the minister's daughter. During the lunch break on the first day, Josephine smiled at the romantic phrasing. Yes, Mr. Stone was kind enough to help me when my wagon caught fire after being struck by lightning. Pa says Mr. Stone used to have the biggest cattle ranch in the territory before he sold it to Mr. Blackwell, piped up Billy Turner, a freckle-faced boy of 12. Is that so? Josephine replied, filing away this information. My pa says he's dangerous, added another child in a hushed voice. Says he killed 3 men in a gunfight last year. That's quite enough gossip, Josephine said firmly, though her heart had begun to race. Back to your studies, everyone. Throughout that first week, Josephine occasionally spotted Dawson around town striding purposefully toward the bank, emerging from the sheriff's office, or sitting alone at a corner table in the hotel restaurant. Each time he acknowledged her with a nod or a tip of his hat, but made no attempt to approach her. His reserve both puzzled and disappointed her. On Friday afternoon, as she was dismissing her students for the day, she was surprised to find him waiting outside the schoolhouse. Mr. Stone, she greeted him, unable to hide her pleasure at seeing him. What brings you to the school? Thought you might like to see something, he replied. If you're not too busy. Intrigued, Josephine quickly gathered her things. Not at all, what is it? It's easier to show you than explain. He indicated 2 horses tied to the hitching post, his own and one she didn't recognize. Can you ride in that dress? She glanced down at her sensible teaching attire. I suppose I'll manage. Dawson helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The brief contact sent a flutter of awareness through her that she tried to ignore. They rode out of town together, heading southwest across open grassland. Where are we going? Josephine asked as Cimarron disappeared behind them. There's a place about 3 miles out that I think you'll appreciate, Dawson replied enigmatically. Not much further. They crested a gentle rise, and Josephine gasped at the vista that opened before them. A small, crystal-clear lake nestled in a natural depression, surrounded by wildflowers and shaded by a stand of cottonwood trees. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the scene, creating a tableau of extraordinary beauty. "Oh, Dawson," she breathed, using his given name without thinking. "It's wonderful," he smiled at her reaction, pleasure evident in his eyes. "I thought you might like it. Not many people know about this place." They dismounted beneath the cottonwoods, and Dawson spread his coat on the ground for her to sit on. The peaceful setting encouraged conversation, and Josephine found herself telling him about her first week of teaching, the challenges, the rewards, the small victories with difficult students. "You sound like you were born to teach," he observed. "Perhaps I was," she replied thoughtfully. "It gives me purpose, knowing I'm helping shape young minds." She plucked a wildflower, twirling it between her fingers. "What about you? What gives you purpose, Dawson Stone?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I used to think it was building something, a ranch, a legacy. Now, I'm not so sure." "Billy Turner mentioned you once owned a large ranch." Dawson's jaw tightened. "The Circle S, my father started it with 40 acres and 10 head of cattle. By the time he died, we had one of the largest spreads in the territory. And you sold it," she prompted gently, "last year, to Henry Blackwell." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Biggest mistake of my life." Josephine sensed there was more to the story, much more, but she didn't press. Instead, she asked, "What will you do now?" He shrugged. "Don't know yet. Head further west, maybe California or north to Montana." "Away from Cimarron," she said softly, surprised by the pang of disappointment she felt. Dawson turned to look at her directly, his blue eyes intense. "There's nothing for me here anymore, Josephine." The sound of her name on his lips sent a tremor through her. "Nothing," she echoed. Something flickered in his eyes, longing, perhaps quickly masked. "I should get you back to town before dark." The ride back was largely silent, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached her cottage, Josephine gathered her courage. "Would you join me for supper tomorrow evening? I'm not an accomplished cook, but I can manage a simple meal." Dawson hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." The following evening found Josephine uncharacteristically nervous as she prepared a modest supper of chicken stew, biscuits, and apple pie. The latter purchased from the hotel restaurant, as her baking skills were questionable at best. She had changed into her nicest borrowed dress, a blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes, and had even pinned her hair in a more flattering style than her usual practical bun. Dawson arrived precisely at 6, freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt beneath his usual vest and jacket. He presented her with a small bouquet of wildflowers, awkwardly gathered but touchingly sincere. "From the lake," he explained as she placed them in a jar of water. "Reminded me of you." Supper was a pleasant affair, the conversation flowing more easily than Josephine had anticipated. Dawson spoke of his childhood in Texas, his father's dreams for their ranch, and his experiences during the Civil War, where he had served despite his youth. In turn, she told him about her privileged upbringing in Boston, her father's restless search for fortune, and her mother's quiet courage in the face of constant upheaval. "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Dawson commented as they lingered over coffee. "She was," Josephine agreed. "She always found beauty in our circumstances, no matter how difficult. Bloom where you're planted, she used to say. Wise advice. Yes, though I'm only now beginning to understand it fully." She studied him in the lamplight, noting the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the strength in his weathered hands. "Dawson, may I ask you something personal?" He tensed slightly but nodded. "What really happened with your ranch? Why did you sell it to this Mr. Blackwell?" Dawson set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "It's not a pleasant story. I'd still like to hear it if you're willing to tell me." He was quiet for so long that Josephine thought he might refuse. Then he began speaking, his voice low and controlled. Henry Blackwell arrived in the territory about 2 years ago with money to burn and ambitions to match. He started buying up small ranches, consolidating them into one massive operation. When he set his sights on the Circle S, I refused to sell. Dawson paused, his expression hardening. That's when the accidents began, cattle mysteriously dying, water sources fouled, fires in my north pastures. Nothing I could prove was Blackwell's doing, but everyone knew. How awful, Josephine murmured. Then my foreman, Jim Hawley's a man who'd worked for my father and then for me for 20 years, was found shot in the back while checking fence lines near Blackwell's property. Josephine's hand flew to her mouth. Was Blackwell arrested? There was no evidence linking him directly to the murder. Jim's death was ruled an unfortunate hunting accident. Dawson's voice was bitter. Blackwell had the sheriff in his pocket by then, so you sold the ranch, not immediately. I confronted Blackwell at the saloon one night. Words were exchanged, then guns. His gaze fixed on some point in the distance. 3 of his men drew on me. I was faster. Josephine's heart raced as she recalled the child's whispered accusation. He killed 3 men in a gunfight last year. After that, I had no choice but to leave, Dawson continued. The sheriff gave me 24 hours to clear out of the territory or face murder charges. I sold the Circle S to Blackwell for a fraction of its worth and rode north to Colorado. But you've come back, Josephine said softly. Why? His eyes met hers, cold and determined. Because the sheriff who threatened me is gone, retired to Texas, they say, though with a surprising amount of money for a man on a lawman's salary. And because I've spent the last year gathering evidence of Blackwell's crimes. Evidence I plan to present to the territorial judge when he arrives next week. Is that wise? If Blackwell is as dangerous as you say, he won't expect me to return, Dawson interrupted. He thinks I'm long gone or dead. The element of surprise gives me an advantage. But the risk is necessary. His tone brooked no argument. Some things a man can't walk away from, Josephine, not and still live with himself. She reached across the table to touch his hand. I understand, just be careful, please. His fingers curled around hers, warm and strong. I didn't mean to burden you with this. It's not a burden to know the truth about someone you. She trailed off, suddenly aware of how close they had become, physically and emotionally. Dawson's gaze dropped to their intertwined hands, then lifted to her face. The air between them seemed charged with possibility. Josephine, he began, his voice husky. A sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. Dawson released her hand and rose swiftly, his right hand moving instinctively toward the gun at his hip. Miss Norton. Called a voice Josephine recognized as belonging to Billy Turner. You in there? Heart still pounding, she went to open the door. Billy stood on her porch, breathless and wide-eyed. Billy, what's wrong? Ma sent me to fetch you quick, the boy panted. Emma Jenkins has taken ill with a high fever, and Doc Stevens is out at the Peterson farm delivering a baby. Ma says you might know what to do, being educated and all. Josephine glanced back at Dawson. I have some basic medical knowledge. I should go, he nodded. I'll come with you. They hurried through the darkened streets to the Jenkins home, where they found the minister and his wife keeping anxious vigil over their feverish daughter. Emma's normally rosy face was flushed with fever, her breathing labored. It came on so suddenly, Mrs. Jenkins explained tearfully. She was fine at supper, and then, may I? Josephine asked, approaching the child's bedside. Mrs. Jenkins nodded, stepping back to allow Josephine to examine her daughter. Emma's skin was burning hot to the touch, her pulse rapid. When Josephine gently pressed on the child's abdomen, Emma whimpered in pain. How long has she had this fever? Josephine asked. A few hours, Reverend Jenkins replied, and she's complained of a headache and sore throat since this afternoon. Josephine thought quickly. It could be several things. We need to bring the fever down first. Do you have any willow bark tea? Mrs. Jenkins shook her head. I don't think so. I'll get some from the apothecary, Dawson offered, already moving toward the door. Mr. Wallace closes at sundown, Reverend Jenkins began, but Dawson was already gone. For the next hour, Josephine did what she could to make Emma comfortable, bathing the child's face and neck with cool water and speaking soothingly to her when she stirred in discomfort. Dawson returned with not only willow bark, but also several other medicinal herbs and tinctures. Mr. Wallace was persuaded to open his shop, was all he said when Josephine raised a questioning eyebrow. Together, they prepared the willow bark tea and coaxed Emma to drink it. By midnight, the child's fever had begun to abate and her breathing was less labored. By dawn, she was sleeping peacefully, the worst of the crisis past. "I don't know how to thank you both," Mrs. Jenkins said as she walked them to the door. "To think what might have happened if you hadn't come." "Emma is strong," Josephine reassured her. "With rest and plenty of fluids, she should recover completely." Outside, the eastern sky was lightening with the approach of dawn. Josephine felt exhausted but exhilarated. They had saved a child's life together. "You were remarkable in there," Dawson said as they walked slowly back toward her cottage. "Where did you learn such things?" "My mother. She was often called upon to tend to the sick in mining camps where doctors were scarce." Josephine stifled a yawn. "And you? How did you persuade Mr. Wallace to open his shop at night?" A smile tugged at the corner of Dawson's mouth. "Let's just say I can be persuasive when necessary." They reached her cottage just as the sun was cresting the horizon. Josephine paused at her door, suddenly reluctant to end their time together despite her fatigue. "Thank you for your help tonight," she said. "You did all the real work," Dawson replied. "I just fetched and carried. Still, I'm grateful for your support." She hesitated, then added, "Would you like to come in for breakfast?" The invitation hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Dawson's eyes darkened as he studied her face, and for a breathtaking moment, Josephine thought he might accept. "You need rest," he said finally, though his voice was rough with suppressed emotion. "And I have business to attend to in town." Disappointment washed over her, though she knew his decision was the sensible one. "Of course, another time perhaps." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that had become familiar. "Good day, Miss Norton." As she watched him walk away, Josephine realized with startling clarity that she was falling in love with Dawson Stone, a man with a dangerous past and an uncertain future. A man who might be gone from her life as quickly as he had entered it. The thought kept her awake long after she should have been sleeping. The next week passed in a blur of teaching, lesson preparation, and community obligations. Josephine saw little of Dawson, though she heard rumors that he had been seen meeting with various ranchers and businessmen throughout the area. Once, she caught a glimpse of him deep in conversation with the new sheriff outside the law office, both men looking grave. On Thursday, the territorial judge arrived in Cimarron, setting up court in the town hall. By Friday morning, the news had spread throughout town. Henry Blackwell had been arrested on multiple charges, including fraud, cattle rustling, and conspiracy to commit murder. "They say Stone provided evidence that couldn't be ignored," Mrs. Peterson told Josephine when she stopped by the cottage after school. "Witness statements, financial records showing bribes to the former sheriff, even a deathbed confession from one of Blackwell's men who was killed in a bar fight in Denver." "What will happen to Mr. Blackwell?" Josephine asked, trying to keep her tone neutral despite her racing heart. "If he's convicted, and everyone says it's certain he'll hang." Mrs. Peterson lowered her voice. "There's talk that Stone might buy back his ranch now that Blackwell's assets will be seized by the court." The news filled Josephine with conflicting emotions. She was relieved that justice would be served and that Dawson's name would be cleared. But if he reclaimed his ranch, would he remain in the area, or would he still leave once his business was concluded? That evening, as she sat on her small porch watching the sunset, a familiar figure appeared on the path to her cottage. Dawson approached slowly, as if uncertain of his welcome. He looked tired but unburdened, as though a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "I heard the news," Josephine said as he reached her porch steps. "Congratulations. Thank you." He removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "May I join you?" She gestured to the empty chair beside her. "Please." They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, watching as the sky transformed into a canvas of oranges, pinks, and purples. "It's over then?" she asked finally. "The judge set the trial for next month, but given the evidence, it's a formality." Dawson's voice was quiet. "Blackwell will pay for his crimes. And your ranch, the court will oversee the sale of Blackwell's assets. I've put in a claim for the Circle S based on the circumstances of the original sale. My lawyer believes it will be granted. Josephine's heart sank. So you'll be leaving Cimarron after all? Dawson turned to look at her directly. That depends. On what? On whether I have a reason to stay. The simple statement hung in the air between them, charged with meaning. Josephine's pulse quickened as their eyes met. Do you? She asked softly. Instead of answering, Dawson reached out to take her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. Josephine, I'm not a man of many words. I've lived most of my life alone and I thought that was enough, but these past weeks, knowing you, it's changed something in me. Josephine's breath caught in her throat. What are you saying, Dawson? I'm saying that for the first time in years I'm thinking about the future instead of the past. His gaze never left her face. And when I do, I see you. Joy blossomed in Josephine's chest, as bright and sudden as a desert flower after rain. I see you too, she whispered. Dawson stood, drawing her to her feet. With exquisite care, he cradled her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the curve of her cheekbones. May I kiss you, Josephine Norton? Yes, she breathed, barely audible. His lips met hers in a kiss that began gently, almost reverently, then deepened as she responded. Josephine wound her arms around his neck, pressing closer as emotions too long contained broke free. When they finally parted, both were breathing unsteadily. I've wanted to do that since I pulled you from that burning wagon, Dawson admitted, his forehead resting against hers. Josephine smiled. What took you so long? Fear, he said simply. Fear that I wasn't worthy of someone like you. Fear that my past would catch up to me before I could build a future. And now I'm only afraid of losing you. His arms tightened around her. I love you, Josephine. I think I've loved you from the moment I saw you standing defiant in that storm, refusing to surrender to the elements. Tears of happiness filled her eyes. I love you too, Dawson Stone, with all my heart. They spent the remainder of the evening talking of their feelings, their hopes, their dreams. Dawson spoke of rebuilding the Circle S, of making it a home rather than just a ranch. Josephine shared her vision for the school, her desire to expand education in the territory. Together, they began to weave their separate futures into a shared one. As the hour grew late, Dawson reluctantly prepared to leave. At the door, he kissed her once more, a promise of many tomorrows. There's a social at the church on Sunday afternoon, Josephine said. Would you escort me? Dawson smiled, the expression transforming his usually solemn features. With pleasure, Miss Norton. It will cause quite a stir, she warned him, only half joking. The schoolteacher and the gunfighter. Former gunfighter, he corrected gently. Just a rancher now, and a man in love. With those words echoing in her heart, Josephine watched him disappear into the night, marveling at how a journey that had begun in fire and fear had led her to such unexpected joy. The trial of Henry Blackwell was brief but sensational. Witnesses from throughout the territory testified to his schemes and strong-arm tactics. The former sheriff, brought back from Texas in chains, confirmed that he had been bribed to look the other way and to threaten Dawson with false charges. The evidence Dawson had painstakingly gathered over the past year proved decisive. Blackwell was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to hang. Justice, so long denied, had finally been served. In the aftermath, the court ruled in Dawson's favor regarding the Circle S. He would be able to repurchase his family ranch at a fraction of its value, using funds from the sale of his Colorado property. Throughout these proceedings, Josephine stood steadfastly by his side. Their courtship had become the talk of Cimarron, with opinions ranging from wholehearted approval to scandalized whispers. The schoolteacher and the rancher, however, paid little heed to gossip. Their love, forged in crisis and strengthened through adversity, was a beacon they followed without hesitation. 1 month after the trial, on a perfect autumn day, Dawson took Josephine to the lake where they had shared their first real conversation. The wildflowers were gone, replaced by the golden hues of fall, but the beauty of the place remained. I brought you here for a reason, Dawson said as they stood by the water's edge. This has always been my favorite spot on Stone Land. Stone Land? Josephine repeated, puzzled. The lake and surrounding acres are part of the Circle S, he explained. My grandfather discovered this place when he first came to the territory. It's been special to my family ever since. He took both her hands in his. Josephine Norton, you came into my life like a storm, unexpected, powerful, changing everything in your path. Before I met you, I was living half a life, consumed by thoughts of revenge. You showed me there could be more. Dawson reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. I want to build that more with you. Will you marry me, Josephine? Will you make a home with me at the Circle S? Teach our children and others in the schoolhouse we'll build there, grow old with me under the New Mexico sky. Tears blurred Josephine's vision as he opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a single perfect pearl. It was my mother's, Dawson said softly, one of the few things I kept when I left the ranch. Yes, Josephine whispered, then louder, yes, Dawson Stone, I will marry you. The ring slid perfectly onto her finger, as if it had been made for her. Dawson gathered her into his arms, his kiss a seal on their promise to each other. They were married 2 weeks later in the Cimarron Church, with Reverend Jenkins officiating. The entire town turned out for the celebration, which lasted well into the night. Emma Jenkins, fully recovered from her illness, served as Josephine's attendant, while Billy Turner proudly stood as Dawson's groomsman. After a brief honeymoon in Santa Fe, the newlyweds returned to begin their life together at the Circle S. The main house had suffered from neglect during Blackwell's ownership, but it was structurally sound. Together, they set about restoring it to its former glory while adding touches that reflected their shared vision. As promised, Dawson built a small schoolhouse on the ranch, where Josephine taught not only their ranch hands' children, but also those from neighboring properties. Her reputation as an excellent educator spread throughout the territory, and eventually, the territorial governor appointed her to a commission on educational standards. Dawson, meanwhile, rebuilt the Circle S into one of the most respected and progressive ranching operations in New Mexico. He introduced new breeding techniques, experimented with more efficient methods of range management, and treated his workers with fairness and respect. Under his stewardship, the ranch prospered beyond even his father's ambitious dreams. Their first child, a son they named James, after Dawson's father, was born a year after their marriage. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Eleanor, named for Josephine's mother. Both children inherited their parents' intelligence, courage, and determination, along with Dawson's blue eyes and Josephine's warm smile. Life was not without challenges. Droughts, harsh winters, economic downturns, and the occasional dispute with neighboring ranchers tested their resilience. Yet through it all, their love remained the bedrock upon which they built their life together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Dawson took Josephine back to the lake where he had proposed. They picnicked on the shore, watching their children play in the shallows, their laughter echoing across the water. "Are you happy, Mrs. Stone?" Dawson asked, his arm around her waist. Josephine looked up at him, at the face she had grown to love more with each passing year. Time had added a few lines and a touch of silver at his temples, but his eyes still held the same intensity, the same capacity for tenderness that had first captured her heart. "Completely," she replied without hesitation. "Are you, Mr. Stone?" His answer was a kiss that held all the passion of their first embrace, yet was deepened by the years of shared joys and sorrows, triumphs and setbacks. "More than I ever thought possible," he murmured against her lips. As twilight descended, they gathered their sleepy children and headed home, riding side by side as they had that first day when Dawson had rescued her from the burning wagon. The Circle S spread before them, peaceful in the gathering dusk, a testament to what could be built from the ashes of destruction when love, courage, and second chances combined. For Josephine and Dawson Stone, the journey that had begun in fire had led them to a life more abundant and joyful than either could have imagined on that stormy night when fate had brought them together. And in the years that followed, as their children grew and their legacy expanded, they never forgot that it was in the midst of their darkest hour that they had found the light that would guide them home. Many years later, when their grandchildren asked how they had met, Dawson would begin the story with a smile. "It was during the worst storm I'd ever seen. Her wagon caught fire and I pulled her out before the flames spread wide." And Josephine would finish with a loving glance at her husband. "And that's when our real journey began." Their love story became legendary in Cimarron and beyond a tale of courage, redemption, and the extraordinary power of love to transform lives. It inspired countless others to believe in second chances and to recognize that sometimes, from the ashes of our greatest trials arise our greatest blessings. For Dawson and Josephine Stone, the fire that had threatened to destroy everything had instead ignited a love that would burn brightly for all their days, warming not only their hearts, but the lives of all who were fortunate enough to know them. And in this, they found the truest meaning of home.